and the publisher, of course, of their monthly journal, The Future Freedom. Welcome back, Jacob. How are you doing?
Hey, doing great. Nice to be back for another round. Scott, how you doing?
Yeah, good to see you. And hey, I just got to see you in real life just almost a week ago at that conference, the Texas Millennial Institute Conference in Fort Worth, where we both gave talks. You were the headliner, which was a good choice of theirs, I thought. But so why don't you tell us a little bit about them and what you thought of it and all that?
Yeah, it was an absolutely awesome conference. I mean, I was amazed because I had never heard of this group before, or the woman, Noelle Mandel, who invited me to speak. And so, but I looked at their website and I said, this is kind of impressive. They were only in existence for 3 months. And so I decided to go down when I saw you participating, and Ted Galen Carpenter of the Cato Institute, and Angela Keaton from Anti-War. I said, wow, that's an impressive thing that they want to hear this hardcore message on foreign policy. So I said, yeah. And it turned out to be an absolutely fantastic conference. I was so impressed. They had greeters, as you know, outside the building. I mean, how often do you see that? And then when you get in the building, a greeter at the elevator, and then you get up to the third floor where the conference was, there's another greeter, and then a registration desk with about 3 or 4 people. Everything ran on time. The talks were great, including yours, and boy, Ted's talk was just hard hitting on partnership, U.S. government partnerships with dictatorial regimes. He gave a broad historical survey of that. Angela was great, and the woman Ghana Muqdad from Syria gave a fascinating talk on her country and the devastation that's taking place there. So, man, I left there on a real high, Scott. I just thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, it really was. Good turnout and everything. And unfortunately, I missed Miss Muqdad's talk. I hope to get her on my radio show at some point, talk to her or something like that. But yeah, certainly everybody else's talk was great. You know, yours was a great closing speech. I thought Angela's speech, I've never heard anybody give a speech quite like that. And, you know, unfortunately, this is the sad part of the thing, is none of this was recorded, audio or video, I don't think. Although I guess I'm relieved that my speech wasn't recorded, because it all got truncated at the end because I ran out of time, and because I spent too much time on the 70s and 80s and stuff, because I'm no good at timing these things. But anyway, Angela's speech was really good, and it was about how, you know, she paraphrased Glenn Greenwald talking about how very serious people always only speak in the most kind of hushed tones and revered sort of sentiments, or at least very neutral and adult figures of speech and so forth when they talk about what she rightly described as mass child killing, just to drive the point home. And I like how she talked about that, and just how much that helps them to get away with the things that they do, because adults are just never supposed to get so upset about such a thing. As long as it's their government doing it in some other country, it's some baseline level acceptable enough. Even if you disagree with the policy, still, I know you're not saying it's a sin, you know, how dare you, kind of thing. You just have to say, you know, whatever. So that was what her speech was about, is what a bunch of crap that is, and how, you know, we should hate them because they're murderers and they deserve to be labeled as such and shamed as such and prosecuted as such, you know, if that's possible, which is kind of talk I like. I was proud of her.
Well, I hate to give you the good news, but I think they were recording it. One of the guys had I think a little portable camera up there that he was doing, and I asked him about that.
Oh, yeah.
That's one of the organizers, and he said, well, for some reason he's recording in 5-minute segments. I didn't understand what that was all about, but they weren't sure whether they were going to have the money or the expertise to upload it to the internet. I told them that I'd be happy to help them out with that. That just send us the speeches at fff.org, and I haven't heard anything from them, so I don't know if the recording came out okay, but they were definitely recording them.
Oh, okay, that's cool. Well, you know, I did notice that one of the reports that came out on the internet, I tweeted it at some point. I don't know, I should do a blog entry at my site where I have 2 or 3 links to the local stories, and one of them had extended quotations from all of us. So yeah, I very much doubt that was transcribed on the fly. Somebody was recording something there, because they had really long quotes from all of us. So
Yeah, there was at least 2 articles about the event, which, boy, again, very impressive that this group was able to pull this off. They told me that they ran the whole thing on a shoestring. They had the room donated, they had the food donated, free food for everybody. There was about 100 people there.
I just keep thinking that I wish I'd said, come on, everybody. How about you just give me 10 more minutes here, man? And then I could have just finished, because I ended up leaving out Somalia, and I didn't talk about how the war in Libya spread down into Mali. I mean, what the good thing is, as soon as the thing was over, a bunch of people came up to talk to me, and they started asking me about Yemen and Somalia and stuff. So I got to go ahead and basically do that part of my speech anyway. But you know,
it was great. It was great. Your talk was great, man.
No, I mean, a lot of it really got left out, and so my conclusion didn't really make sense, because I had this whole thing about, you know, whether we do this or whether we do that, but I never really got to the do that part. I only described the this part. So, meh. Anyway, I'm not good at giving speeches. I mean, I don't know. I'm
you
good
were
at running my
great at giving
mouth,
speech. Man, you're too self-critical. Your talk was great. You went up there, you didn't read the speech, and you talked extemporaneously, and you were captivating. I enjoyed the talk. I hope they got it recorded.
All right. Well, thanks. You're kind and all that. But anyway, yeah, it was a good thing. And you know, the important part is that, you know, and I have to admit, and everybody can see here how silver my beard's turning, that I'm an old man now. I used to be young. That was one of my virtues, but now that's gone. But but those people, they really proved the point that they are young compared to me. They are, I'm at the tail end of Generation X, as they called it, I guess. And these certainly are the millennials, and they are a whole new generation. And they seem to really be on point about this stuff. They seem to, you know what it is? They seem to not be at all impressed with the standard line of conventional wisdom that they're supposed to just receive and believe. You know, they didn't seem very hard to convince of the truth, in other words, you know.
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, they have achieved a breakthrough that we've all achieved as libertarians, and they see it. I mean, the fact that they invited the 4 of us, to me, that says everything, because where we stand on foreign policy and the national security state and foreign interventionism, that means that these students, these young people, they wanted to hear from us. And
yeah,
that,
I mean,
to
Ted
me,
was
is
the
an
most
encouraging
statist guy there, and he was hardcore.
Say that again?
I said Ted was the most statist guy there, the Cato guy, and he was hardcore. There was nothing compromising about anything he said at all. It was great. He had really good lines too. You know, he was awesome.
Well, yeah, I question your term of the least statist or the most statist. We're all libertarians, and Ted's talk was absolutely
people think of Cato as the more mainstream Washington D.C. focused or whatever, but I really just was setting him up for praise. That, you know, there was nothing statist about him at all. He was really great.
Yeah, it really was. I'm hoping he reduces that talk to writing. It was just absolutely fantastic.
Yep. All right, cool. So, hey, man, listen, I want to ask you about the coup d'etat in Chile that Nixon and Kissinger carried out down there. You got this great article this week, and the thing of it is, in fact, I'm not sure. Is this a Future Freedom article that's kind of old and new again, published here? This one?
No, that was a blog that was done this week.
Yeah, okay, brand new. I thought so. I just want to make sure. Because sometimes everybody, I don't know if you're familiar, sometimes they run on a delay if they were in the journal first. But anyway, it's called, "Is Pinochet's Assassination of Letelier Still a Conspiracy Theory?" And your piece then starts out in reference to a piece in Newsweek saying that the State Department has released some long secret documents. So what are the new revelations? And then please do, like you do in the article, and dive into explaining just what happened there. It's such a great example of what the CIA does day in, day out, all over the world. It just goes to show there's nothing abnormal about it. This is American foreign policy at play. The thing that's abnormal would be marching in 300,000 soldiers like Iraq War II. But what they usually do is they just kill your president.
Yeah, the Chile regime change operation is an absolutely fascinating event in U.S. history, and it really shows the inanity of the whole Cold War, but especially the inanity of grafting on this national security apparatus onto the United States government in order to wage the so-called Cold War. Now, let me preface this, though, Scott, by explaining why we didn't do the show last night. because this relates to the Chilean regime change operation too. That there was a great talk scheduled last night that I really wanted to make, and it was in D.C. at a bookstore, and is to celebrate the publication of a fantastic new book that I cannot recommend highly enough. The author is David Talbot, and he has written a book called oh my gosh, here I'm drawing a blank. It'll come to me in a minute. But it's a biography of Allen Dulles, the CIA director, throughout the 50s and 60s. The guy who was really responsible for a lot of the regime change operations. And Talbot is the former founder of Salon.com. He's written another book on the JFK assassination called Brothers, which reached the New York Times bestseller list. He's written a book that's a story of Smedley Butler that we all know about, and how he blocked a coup attempt during the Franklin Roosevelt administration by the military, and or elements within the military. And now he's come out with this fantastic book that I'm still trying to blank on, that is a biography of Dulles from the early days of his life through the World War II, through the Cold War era, all the way up to the Kennedy assassination. And so he's actually, I haven't read the entire book. I've only read about 10% on Kindle, but he's building up to the Kennedy assassination, which, from what I can tell, he's saying that Dulles was the orchestrator of this assassination, of this regime change operation domestically.
I just Googled it up here. It's the Devil's Chessboard.
The Devil's Chessboard. Very good. Yeah. All right. So I highly recommend that book. We're getting somebody. Well, I'll tell you, we're getting Michael Swanson, who, as you know, is the author of this other fantastic book that I cannot recommend highly enough, The War State. He's doing a review of the book. So it was a fantastic evening with Talbot, and I got a chance to visit with him, and he's just a real gentleman, a real scholar and a gentleman. So the Devil's Chessboard, fantastic book. All right, so we're moving up to 1970, where Salvador Allende is elected president of Chile, democratically elected. Now, he didn't win by a majority; it was a plurality, which threw it into the Congress. And at this point, the U.S. government, President Nixon and Henry Kissinger, National Security Advisor, I mean, there's that big term, national security, the Pentagon, the CIA, they go ballistic, because not only is Allende a socialist, believing in all the economic philosophy of, say, Franklin Roosevelt and Social Security and Medicare and so forth, he's just a self-avowed communist, but he's a professor. He's like an academic communist. He believes in Marxism and so forth. But the man's been elected. The people of Chile have spoken. He didn't win a majority, but it gets thrown into the Congress. And immediately the CIA goes in there and starts bribing congressmen not to approve him. And, well, they said, no, it's the tradition. The guy that wins the plurality wins the election. So they elected him, and so he's president. And so from 1970 to 1973, the CIA and goes on the offensive. They create economic chaos in the country, which was, of course, aggravating the socialist economic chaos from Allende. And they decide that they're going to oust this guy, but they can't do it. The only way they can really do it is through a military coup. So they start bringing up Chilean officers to the School of the Americas. They start indoctrinating them. They start teaching them that it is the duty of a national security establishment in a country, when a president whose policies are threatening national security, to do what's necessary. You don't look at the Constitution, but you got to do what's necessary, save the country from the president, and oust him from power, which, of course, then relates back to Talbot's theme, that that's exactly what they did when they perceived that Kennedy's policies were a threat to national security. So here they are doing it in Chile and encouraging their counterparts in Chile to do it to their own president. And in the process, Scott, the CIA conspires to kidnap the commanding general of the Chilean Armed Forces. I mean, that's like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And the reason? Well, because he, a guy named Rene Schneider, says, no, there's not going to be any coup here. I believe in supporting and defending the Constitution of this country. This man was elected. If you don't like it, we wait until the next election. So they conspired to have the guy kidnapped, the CIA did, and in that kidnapping attempt, the guy was murdered. So here you had an entirely innocent man who's standing for the Constitution of his country, murdered. So on September 11th, September 11th, and down in Chile, the military comes in and takes control in a violent coup. People are killed. You've got two branches of the government battling against each other, the executive branch and the national security branch. The national security branch, not surprisingly, wins. Kind of shows you the power of a national security establishment with all its armaments. The executive branch can't stand up to this type of thing. Neither did the judiciary. Neither did the legislative branch. So you had a total dictatorship here. Now, after this, as part of this dictatorship, they start murdering people, rounding people up. They rounded up some 30,000 people, no trial, no due process, no arrest warrants, just rounded them up, tortured them, raped them, kept them in jail for a long time, and killed 3,000 of them. What was their crime? That they believed in communism. They were supporting Allende. And so Pinochet, General Augusto Pinochet, who was the head of this thing, he decided he was going to cleanse Chile of communists and communism. Now, you and I are libertarians. We oppose communism with every fiber of our being, but we also believe that people have a right to believe in whatever they want to believe, even if that's communism. And so, what he did was abhorrent. He murdered people for what they believed in. Well, as part of this, he goes on, he organizes something called Operation Condor, a top secret operation run by his henchman-in-chief, a guy named Manuel Contreras. And the CIA becomes a partner in that ring. And this is an international assassination group. So, it was perfect for the CIA because the CIA was like the leader in assassinations even back then. They were trying to assassinate Castro. Why? Because Castro was a believer in communism. So they felt that if you believe in communism, that makes you fair game. This was the Cold War. We can kill you just for what you believe in. So they come up to Washington, D.C., the Operation Condor agents, and they murder a guy named Orlando Letelier on the streets of Washington, along with his young assistant, a young woman who was like in her 20s, named Ronnie Moffett, who was working with him. Now, who was Letelier? Letelier had served in the Allende administration. I think he was like foreign minister, something like that, ambassador to the UN. Can't remember exactly what his title was. But and then here he came to the United States after being tortured during the coup, and he starts lobbying. He's working for a leftist organization. He starts lobbying to cut off funds to Chile. This guy is, a brutal dictator. Well, so Allende says, look, I have the authority to kill, not Allende, Pinochet says, I got the authority to kill any communist in the world. He had the same mindset as the war on terrorism, as the U.S. National Security States war on terrorism. We can go anywhere in the world. It's a global arena, global war on communism, same as the global war on terrorism. We can kill anybody in Latin America. They kill some 60,000 people, if you can believe that, in Latin America for being communist. But they come up to Washington, they kill Letelier. Well, the CIA, interestingly enough, immediately comes out right after the car bombing that killed these two people. They say, oh, it was probably done by a communist, which, of course, was established policy that the U.S. was teaching Latin Americans that when you have a covert state-sponsored assassination, always blame it on a communist, which, of course, brings up the interesting case of Lee Harvey Oswald, who was the convenient communist in the Kennedy assassination. So it turns out that the CIA comes across evidence that Allende ordered this hit, but they keep it secret. They keep it secret all the way up to last week, and the State Department keeps it secret. The U.S. government keeps it secret. For those that say the U.S. government and the CIA can't keep secrets when it comes to assassination, that's just nonsense. They keep their secrets very well, and so they said, okay,
as you're saying, an assassination with a bomb on American soil, in fact, in the capital city, they'll go ahead and let that slide.
Well, they actually didn't let it slide. This is what's kind of interesting. The Justice Department, obviously because there was some public pressure here, decide to investigate the case, and they call it a murder case. And they discover that some of the people are Cuban exiles that did this bomb. led by a guy named Michael Townley, who people have suggested had ties to the CIA. He was an American living down in Chile, and people have long suspected that Townley had ties, but they've never been established. And so Townley was the guy that organized the whole thing here. He comes into the United States. He gets these Cuban exiles. They set the bomb underneath the car. And so the Justice Department prosecutes these guys. Well, from what I can tell, the lower echelon guys, the Cuban exiles, they never went to jail. They went to trial, but somehow or another they got off. I'm not really sure exactly how. I think legal technicalities. Well, Townley pleads out and gets, if you can believe this, in cold-blooded murder of 2 innocent people. He ends up serving like 5 years in jail. And here's the real odd part about all this thing. Townley gets admitted into the Federal Witness Protection Program. Now, usually you admit somebody in there when he's going to testify against somebody higher, not against somebody lower. Some people suggest, well, he was going to testify against the lower echelon people, the people he had put together, which really makes a sham out of Federal Witness Protection. But the other possibility was that he was going to testify against Pinochet if that ever came up. But they were keeping hidden the evidence that they had that Pinochet had done this. So they finally decided to release this, and apparently Pinochet had ordered Contreras, and Contreras was willing to testify that Pinochet had said this, and the CIA had this in their files to keep this covered up all these years. And so that's why I titled my piece, is the Pinochet murder of Orlando Letelier and Ronnie Moffett still a conspiracy theory? Because that's what people used to always say when we'd say, oh, Pinochet was behind this. Oh, conspiracy theory, conspiracy theory. Well, there was a lot of circumstantial evidence pointing in that direction, and so here we have the CIA involved in another cover-up.
Yeah. So they let it slide for some anyway, for the ones at the top. All right, now, so I got to change the subject quick because we're almost out of time. Talk about Ben Carson and guns and the Holocaust, because he said what right-wingers and libertarians always say about guns and the Holocaust, but what apparently 150 million liberals in America heard for the first time last week and were absolutely shocked and appalled to hear from presidential candidate Ben Carson there.
Yeah, I wrote a piece on that today. It's at fff.org. The Carson says, look, he says in his book, and he repeated it, I think, publicly, he says that if Jews and Germans had been free to own guns, what Hitler's horror accomplished would have been significantly diminished, I think his words were. And so this guy, I forget his name now, he's a professor at the University of Vermont, Steinweiss. He writes an op-ed in the New York Times. It's got to be the most ludicrously argued piece I've ever seen, or at least ranking near the top.
Which is really saying something in the New York Times that publishes Tom Friedman and used to publish Bill Kristol. Sorry, go ahead.
I can't believe they published this guy on this piece. He says, I've been studying the Holocaust all my life in German history. And when Carson says this, it trivializes the Holocaust. Now, that's ridiculous, as I put out in a piece. When a guy talks about gun control and the effects on gun control and how this might have an effect on Hitler's horrific tyranny, how can that trivialize the Holocaust? I mean, it's ridiculous. We don't know what would have happened if Jews had been permitted to own guns, or had been free to own guns, I should say. But we can imagine that they certainly would have fought battles against the German police that came and got them, arrested them, and took them to the death camps. I mean, at some point, a lot of Jews understood what was happening here, and you had, of course, the Warsaw Uprising. But if people had been free to own guns, they wouldn't have. When you don't own guns, Scott, you have one choice, and that's to say, okay, when they start taking you away to the concentration camp. With guns, you got two choices. Now, all of a sudden, you can resist. Now, Steinweiss says, oh, well, they couldn't have stood up to the massive police state of Germany. Well, you never really know that. I mean, 1% of the German population consisted of Jews. That's about 800,000 people at that time. That's a lot of people to take up arms against the state. And now, the other thing I point out in my article, okay, they might lose, but you make the tyrant pay an enormous price in terms of casualties, in terms of having to devote resources over to that sector, as compared to just the resources involved peacefully moving people to concentration camps. I gave the example of the Alamo, where people there were armed. They were facing an omnipotent state in Santa Anna's army. They were totally outgunned. They knew they couldn't win at some point. And they said, we're going to stay here, we're going to die, and we're going to take out a lot of Mexican soldiers in the process, and we're going to buy time for Santa Ana. And it worked. Sam Houston ends up winning the battle at San Jacinto because of what happened at the Alamo.
You know,
and
I read
that's what
Jacob,
happened with the Jews.
I read a thing where I guess it was in the Huffington Post or something, and it was only because they were attacking Ben Carson was the only reason that they could make this argument. Otherwise, it would have sounded too much like you and would have not written it at all. But the point was, and of course it's true, that many Jews were armed and did fight back, and not so much in Germany, but in the East. And many of them joined up with the Soviet army. And guess what? They did end the Holocaust, and they did kill and destroy and defeat the Nazis. They were part of it. Guess what? They were part of a giant army of millions of armed men who defeated the Nazis. You know, obviously it wasn't all of them, but nobody just sat and like saying kumbaya and passed gun control laws until the Third Reich disappeared. They shot at it until it disappeared.
Well, that's right. And that's what Thomas Jefferson says, is that everybody's got a right to resist tyranny with force. You got a right to defend yourself. And let's face it, Scott, there's some dignity and some consolation of saying, okay, I'm going to go down, but I'm going to take 5 of you with me. Yeah. I'm going to go down.
That's the other part of it was I saw where people argued that, oh no, look at the Warsaw Ghetto where everything was going fine. And then a few of the extremists started killing Nazis and they only killed a few dozen of them or 40 or 50 of them or something. But then 13,000 Jews were killed in the final clampdown on the Warsaw Ghetto. So that just goes to show that they shouldn't have fought back at all. They would have been much better off if they just waited it out, basically.
Yeah, and
probably they had no right to resist with arms because look what trouble they got all their friends into.
Yeah, and I don't know where this guy stands on gun control. It wasn't clear, but my hunch is that he's on the liberal side on gun control. And let's face it, gun rights here in the United States are an insurance policy. They're an insurance policy against tyranny. And for those that say that could never happen in the United States, balderdash. The U.S. government has supported tyrants in Chile. We talked about that. They support tyrants right now in Egypt. They're long supporters of tyrannical regimes. So never discount the possibility that they would impose those kind of things here. But the reason they would be dissuaded from doing that is they know they would pay an enormous price because so many people are armed and are willing to resist tyranny if that were ever to be the case. The best one of the best opinions on this is Judge Kaczynski in the cases Silvera versus Lockyer. If our viewers haven't seen that opinion, it's a dissenting opinion. Go ahead and Google it. It's Silvera versus Lockyer. Fantastic. And he says, look, people who go through gun control, they only make that mistake once, and that's the mistake the Jews made. The reason it's only made once is because you can't correct it. And so the worst thing that could ever happen is for the United States to adopt this kind of principle where, oh, just let the government have the guns and the police have the guns. You don't need them. They'll keep you safe.
Right. Well, and hey, look at what's going on in Palestine right now. The Palestinians have rocks and knives, and the Israelis have American M16s and F-16s and completely brutalize the Palestinians all day, every day. They've occupied the West Bank and East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip longer than the Soviet Union occupied Eastern Europe. And they have absolute and complete impunity. To arms, to arms. Let every Palestinian man own an AR-15 and watch the occupation end and watch the long-term theft, otherwise known as the settlements, the colonization program of the Israelis come to a screeching halt. But instead, you know, as George Carlin put it, Israeli killers are called commandos. Palestinian commandos are called terrorists. And of course, Israeli commandos have all the power that America can buy them. And the Palestinians are disarmed to a man. The best they got is a single-bladed knife.
Well, that's why I say it. Disarmed people are very obedient. a very compliant people. Compare that
Well,
to
I don't know if you could say that about the Palestinians, but they're certainly slaves. They certainly have no human rights whatsoever and no ability to get them back.
Well, that's right. And I pointed out in my article, compare that to the Swiss people. The most well-armed people in the world in history, maybe second only to the United States. When Hitler was faced with invading Switzerland, which he wanted to do, his advisors told him, we could win. There's no guarantee here we could win, but it would be like swallowing a porcupine. We will suffer so many casualties that it's just not worth it. And so Hitler never invaded Switzerland. So it goes to show you the importance of an armed society. And thank goodness for our ancestors with that Second Amendment, because that's what they had in mind. When they enacted that First Amendment and the Second Amendment, they addressed that to the government. They said the government threatens freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and people are going to be armed in this country just in case y'all ever get any thoughts of doing what Pinochet was doing in Chile, which, hey, by the way, they supported, and what Al-Sisi's doing in Egypt, which, by the way, they're supporting too.
Yeah. All right. Now, so there's too many things to talk about. We're already over time, but I got to give you a chance real quick to comment upon the release of the drone papers by as yet anonymous whistleblower to The Intercept. There's have you seen a new 10-part series of articles that have been put out based on top secret military internal review of the drone assassination program in Afghanistan, Yemen, and Somalia.
I saw that this morning. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to read through it. My colleague Bart found it, and we linked it in our FFF Daily. And ironically, I mean, just coincidentally, we're carrying a fantastic article from our journal, Future of Freedom, that we published several months ago by Joseph Stromberg on the immorality of air power. So it kind of came in at the exact right time.
Yeah, which is actually going to be the spotlight article over the weekend on antiwar.com because it's so fantastic. Great. I love Joe Stromberg.
Yeah, and so from what I understand, I mean, it turns out that all they've been talking about, the precision of the drone assassinations, where they're only hitting people that are real, genuine terrorists, is all a sham. It's all a lie. You know, sort of like the Gulf of Tonkin attack. That really, from what I understand, the whole thing is a gigantic, catastrophic, deadly mess. Now, you can probably tell me more about that because I haven't read the whole analysis yet. But it is at The Intercept.
Yeah, I'm just getting into it myself, and I talked with Corey Courier, who did two of the stories actually on the show yesterday. But I'm going to spend the weekend with him digging through there. The great Nick Turse, who is America's greatest journalist on the question of America's invasion of Africa and embedding our special forces in the vast majority of the 54 nations of Africa and all of that. He wrote one of them, and then there's one that's all about headhunting in the Hindu Kush Mountains in Afghanistan by Ryan Devereaux that I can't wait to get my eyes on. So,
well, let me make one more comment about this too before we sign off.
Yeah.
From what I understand, it's like there's an Edward Snowden, another Edward Snowden.
Right, that's right, brand new
document, which is fantastic. But we're going to hear all the same stuff. He's a traitor. He's a bad person. Nonsense. Anybody who's revealing the lies of the U.S. government and the secret operations that are killing innocent people, that is your very model of patriotism. But it's another reason why we've got to just dismantle the national security state. Look at the assassinations. They've been going on for decades, and now you got a formal program of assassination that's killing ever more innocent people, making us less safe because it's going to be creating more anger overseas. So here we go again, Scott, with more wrongdoing by the national security establishment.
Yeah, well, it is heroic, and I do hope that other bureaucrats will take note. You know, Dan Ellsberg back years ago, since the start of the terror war, really has been begging American national security officials to do the right thing, step up and leak documents. Leak them to your senators, leak them to your congressmen, leak them to the papers. Do what you can to tell the truth to the people. And yeah, you know what? You might have to go to prison. But guess what? There are young guys over there getting their manhood blown off in Afghanistan over a bunch of lies. They're putting their entire lives, their body parts on the line for a bunch of crap. And all you got to do is maybe sit in the brig for a few years. If you tell the truth and get them out of that, then do your duty.
Good, well expressed. And let's not fail to mention all the innocent people they're killing too, which then makes us less safe because you've got all that anger and rage that boils in people when you kill their wedding parties or their families and whatever. And so now you got this perpetual war on terrorism. As I said in my speech down there in Fort Worth, you've got the greatest, biggest terrorist producing machine in history with this foreign policy. Time to bring all the troops home, bring the drones home, discharge the troops into the private sector, and let's start talking about restoring a limited government republic to our land, or as some other libertarians would say, restoring a competing defense system to our land.
Yeah, there you go. All right, well, now listen, so your great one, really great one. How can anyone still be an interventionist? We're going to have to leave that as a rhetorical question for the end of this show, but we'll be running that on antiwar.com on Monday. But for now, thanks again, Jacob, for doing the show. Great to see you again. And we'll be back here, everybody, next Thursday here at Liberty.me for the future freedom.
Thank you, Scott. Love doing the show with you, man. Thank you.